Welcome back to the darkest corners of history. In the flashbulbs of 1950s, Hollywood Marie McDonald was celebrated as the body, a masterpiece of flesh and blood. But inside the gated mansion of her husband, the shoe tycoon Karl, she was something else entirely, a possession. Friends and insiders described their marriage less as a partnership and more as a hostage situation. While the public saw a benevolent philanthropist, reports from within the mansion suggest a dynamic of intense control and emotional isolation. This control began long before the violence, manifesting first as a subtle chemical grip on her life. Karl was a man who solved problems with logistics. If a shoe store was underperforming, he closed it. If an employee was stealing, he fired them. If a wife was hysterical, he sedated her. The master bedroom of the Karl mansion was less a sanctuary and more a high-end psychiatric ward. The nightstand on Marie's side of the bed was a chaotic pharmacy. There were bottles of Seconal to pull her into sleep. There were bottles of Benzedrine to drag her back to consciousness. There were tranquilizers to level out the peaks and painkillers to numb the valleys. Harry did not force these pills down her throat physically. He didn't have to. He created an environment where reality was so suffocating that Marie begged for the anesthesia. To insiders, it appeared he watched her addiction deepen with a cold detachment, fueling rumors that her dependency was a tool for his control. When she was high, she was compliant. When she was sedated, she didn't ask questions about where he went at night or why mobsters like Mickey Cohen were calling the house. This was the love portion of their tragedy, a weaponized codependency. Karl loved Marie the way a collector loves a rare artifact. He wanted to own her, to hoard her, and to ensure she shone only for him. But when the gold began to tarnish, when Marie began to fight back against the chemical leash, the dynamic shifted from containment to punishment. In the months leading up to January 1957, the mansion became a battlefield. Marie had briefly filed for divorce, threatening to expose Harry's cold cruelty and his questionable business connections. She had threatened to blow the lid off his carefully constructed persona of the benevolent philanthropist. Harry had reeled her back in, not with apologies, but with financial strangulation. He cut off her credit. He froze her assets. She returned to him not out of forgiveness, but out of starvation. She crawled back into the glass cage because she didn't know how to survive in the wild. But a broken thing is dangerous. Marie was erratic. She was paranoid. She told friends that Harry was watching her, that the servants were spies, that the phone was tapped. People dismissed it as the ranting of a washed-up drunk. They didn't realize that in the world of Karl, paranoia was just a heightened state of awareness. To Marie and to the few friends who still listened to her, the timing was suspicious. Harry couldn't just divorce her again. She knew too much about his business dealings, and she was too volatile to be silenced by a settlement. She was a liability. In the years that followed, theories would emerge that what happened next was not a random crime, but a calculation, a script designed to dismantle her credibility so thoroughly that if she ever tried to speak against him again, the world would only hear the ravings of a lunatic. With Marie isolated and discredited, the stage was set for the main event on the night of January 4th, 1957. The atmosphere in the Karl mansion was heavy with a silence that felt manufactured. The children were asleep in a distant wing of the house. The servants had retired or were conspicuously absent. Marie was in her bedroom, wearing silk pajamas, drifting in the hazy borderland between a Seconal dose and reality. She was reading a book, or pretending to, trying to quiet the noise in her head. Harry was not there. He was out, a convenient absence that would later fuel the darkest rumors about who truly orchestrated the night's events. At approximately midnight, the doorbell rang. It was a jarring sound in the stillness of Beverly Hills. It wasn't the polite chime of a visitor, it was a demand. Marie, groggy and confused, checked the time. Who would be calling at this hour? A telegram? A delivery? She moved through the darkened house like a ghost. The drugs in her system made her limbs feel heavy, her perception slightly delayed. She reached the heavy front door. She didn't look through the peephole. She didn't ask who it was. She opened it. The violence was immediate. There were two men. One was heavy-set, with the thick, calloused hands of a laborer. The other was smaller, nervous, wiry. They didn't look like cat burglars. They looked like mechanics. They looked like men who had been hired to fix a problem. The heavy one pushed his way in. The force of it sent Marie stumbling back against the foyer table. A vase wobbled. The air in the hallway instantly changed from the scent of expensive potpourri to the smell of cheap tobacco, sweat, and gun oil. "Don't scream," the heavy man said. It wasn't a shout. It was a statement of fact. He pulled a gun from his jacket. It was a snub-nosed revolver, dull black metal that seemed to absorb the light from the chandelier. Marie froze. The body that had launched 1,000 ships was suddenly just a terrified woman in flimsy pajamas. "What do you want?" she whispered. "Take my rings. Take the silver on the table. Just take it and go." The man with the gun smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We don't want the silver, lady. We want you." A common thief takes the path of least resistance. He grabs the cash and runs. These men were not in a hurry. They closed the door behind them. They locked it. They were sealing the set. They moved toward her with a terrifying familiarity. They didn't ask where the safe was. They didn't ask if anyone else was home. They knew. They moved through the house as if they had studied the blueprints. Marie tried to run. It was a pathetic, drug-fueled attempt. She scrambled toward the phone on the hallway table. The wiry man was faster. He grabbed the cord and ripped it from the wall. The plastic jack snapped with a sound like a breaking bone. "Harry!" she screamed. "Harry!" The name echoed off the marble floors and died in the empty house. The heavy man grabbed her by the arm. His grip was bruising. He dragged her not toward the safe, but toward the bedroom. "Get your coat," he said. "My coat?" Marie stammered. The absurdity of the request cut through her panic. Who kidnaps someone and tells them to dress warmly? "It's cold where you're going," the man said. He shoved her into the bedroom. He watched as she fumbled with a thin robe, offering little protection against the night. He was enjoying this. This wasn't just a job. It was a power trip. He was dominating the woman that every man in America fantasized about. He was seeing the body trembling, tears streaming down her face, her glamour stripped away to reveal the raw panic underneath. They dragged her out the back door, avoiding the streetlights in the front. A car was waiting in the alleyway. It was a dark sedan, nondescript, the kind of car that vanishes into traffic. They threw her into the back seat. The wiry man got behind the wheel. The heavy man climbed in next to her, pressing the gun into her ribs. "Keep your head down," he hissed, "and shut up." The engine roared to life. The car surged forward, tires crunching on the gravel of the service road. Marie McDonald lay on the floorboard of the car, smelling the dust in the carpet, feeling the vibration of the axle against her hip. She was leaving the safety of Beverly Hills. She was leaving the jurisdiction of the civilized world. She was entering a darkness where her name, her fame, and her money meant nothing. The drive into that darkness lasted for hours, or maybe minutes. Time distorts when you are terrified and medicated. Marie lay in the dark, her mind racing. Why hadn't they asked for a ransom? Why hadn't they bound her hands yet? The heavy man in the back seat was calm, too calm. He lit a cigarette. The smoke filled the car, choking her. "Where are you taking me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just relax, doll," the man said. "You've got a long night ahead of you." He reached into his pocket. Marie flinched, expecting a knife. Instead, he pulled out a small glass bottle. He rattled it. The sound was unmistakable. It was her pills. "Time for your medicine," he said. Marie stared at him in the gloom. How did he have her pills? How did he know? "Take 'em," he ordered. "Boss wants you quiet." She swallowed the pills dry. The chemical cycle was being enforced by strangers now. The complicity was terrifying. These men weren't just criminals. They were orderlies in the asylum her husband had built. They were continuing the regimen. The car slowed down. The road had changed from the smooth asphalt of the city to a bumpy, unpaved track. The air coming through the vents was colder, drier. They were in the desert. The car stopped, the doors opened. The silence of the desert night was immense. "Get out," the man commanded. Marie stumbled out onto the sand. The cold hit her like a physical blow. She was shivering violently, her silk pajamas offering no protection against the desert wind. The men led her toward a small, dilapidated structure. It looked like an abandoned shack, a relic of a failed mining claim. Inside, it was dark and smelled of rat droppings and mold. They shoved her into a chair. The heavy man produced a rope. He began to tie her hands behind her back. He wasn't gentle, but he wasn't frantic. He tied the knots with the precision of a man wrapping a package. Then, having secured their audience of one, the theater of pain began. It wasn't an interrogation. They didn't ask her for codes to bank accounts. They didn't ask her where the diamonds were. They just hit her. Her tormentor struck her across the face with the back of his hand. Snap! Marie's head whipped back. The taste of copper filled her mouth. "That's for being a loudmouth," the man said. He hit her again. A closed fist this time. It connected with her eye. The pain was blinding, a white-hot explosion behind her retina. Marie screamed. The sound was swallowed by the thick walls of the shack. "Please," she begged. "I'll give you anything. Harry will pay you anything." The mention of her husband's name seemed to amuse them. The wiry man laughed, a high, nervous sound. "Harry's the one paying the tab, sweetheart." The brute leaned in close. His breath smelled of stale coffee and malice. He grabbed her jaw, his fingers digging into her cheeks. "You think you're pretty, don't you?" he whispered. "You think because you're on a magazine cover you're better than us? You're just meat." He pulled a heavy object from his pocket. In the dim light, it looked like the butt of the revolver. "Open wide," he said. Marie clamped her mouth shut, shaking her head. He struck her across the face with brutal force. The impact shattered the expensive porcelain caps that perfected the body's smile. 3 teeth were dislodged in an instant. Marie choked on blood and ceramic fragments. She gagged. The pain was so intense it transcended physical sensation and became a white noise in her brain. She slumped forward, spitting blood onto the dirt floor. The heavy man stepped back, wiping the gun on his pants. "Now you look like the rest of us," he said. This was the core of the violence. It wasn't about money. It was about desecration. It was about taking the symbol of Marie McDonald, her beauty, and destroying it. It was a message written in blood and broken bone. The message was, your value is gone. You are broken. No one will want you now. Then the brutality abruptly ended, replaced by a grotesque parody of care. After beating her, after breaking her face, the men didn't kill her. They didn't leave her to bleed out. The wiry man brought a canteen of water. He held it to her swollen, bleeding lips. "Drink," he said softly. According to Marie's later testimony, a bizarre domestic scene followed. He turned on a portable radio, the music clashing violently with the horror in the room. "Here," the heavy man said. He threw a pillow onto the dirt floor. "Lie down. Get some rest." Marie looked at them through her one functioning eye. The dissonance was shattering her mind. They had just mutilated her, and now they were tucking her in? They were nursing her? Why? She slurred through her broken mouth. "Orders," the man said. "Don't want you dead. Just fixed." She lay on the pillow, the blood pooling in her mouth, the sedatives beginning to pull her under. The radio played a love song. The men sat in the corner playing cards, ignoring the woman they had just destroyed. Marie McDonald closed her eyes. She wasn't in the desert anymore. She was back in the glass cage. The walls had just gotten wider. The guards had changed faces, but the warden was the same. To Marie, the cold efficiency of the violence felt familiar. Though he was miles away, she began to suspect that her husband's influence had orchestrated this nightmare. It didn't feel like a robbery. It felt like a punishment. As the drug took hold, pulling her into the black velvet of unconsciousness, she realized the terrifying truth. They weren't just kidnapping her for money. They were breaking her for sport. They were beating the rebellion out of her until only the obedient wife remained. And somewhere in Beverly Hills, Karl was unreachable, secure in his fortress, while his wife lay broken in the dirt, a masterpiece reduced to rubble. Time in the desert shack did not pass in hours. It passed in throbs of agony. Marie McDonald awoke to a world that had shrunk to the size of a dirt floor and the smell of dry rot. The pain in her mouth was a living thing, a rhythmic pounding that synced with her heartbeat. She ran her tongue over the broken remnants of her smile. The sharp pain was a brutal reminder that the nightmare wasn't a hallucination. The perfection of the body had been permanently marred. She tasted the copper tang of her own blood mixed with the grit of the desert floor. She tried to sit up, but the room spun. The drugs, the kidnappers, no, the custodians, had forced down her throat were doing their work. Her limbs felt like they were filled with wet sand. She was the body, the physical ideal of American womanhood, now reduced to a heap of bruised flesh and torn silk in a shanty miles from civilization. The two men were still there. They hadn't fled with the loot. They hadn't panicked. They were sitting on crates playing cards by the light of a kerosene lantern. The scene was domestic in a way that made Marie's skin crawl. It was casual. It was bored. The heavy man looked up as she stirred. He didn't look at her with lust or anger. He looked at her like a mechanic assessing a car waiting for parts. "You're awake," he stated flatly. He walked over, not to hit her, but to prepare her. He held out a tin cup of water and a handful of pills, her own prescription, stolen from her nightstand. Inside the shack, the routine continued with terrifying precision. The heavy man approached, ensuring she was sedated enough to be compliant, but conscious enough to speak. He hauled her up, his voice devoid of negotiation. "Time to work, doll. We need you on the line." "The line?" Marie stammered. "To the bank." The wiry man chuckled from the corner. "To the Shoe King." With the victim prepared, they hauled her to her feet for the performance. She was unsteady, her legs buckling under the weight of the trauma and the chemicals. They led her to a corner of the shack, where a dusty black telephone sat on a crate. It was connected to a line that ran out through a hole in the rotting wood, a dedicated line in the middle of nowhere. This wasn't a random hideout. This was a prepared stage. The heavy man picked up the receiver and dialed with a terrifying familiarity, as if he didn't need to look up the digits. Marie listened to the clicking of the rotary dial. Each click was a second ticking away from her life. She prayed that Harry would answer. She prayed that he was frantic, that he had the police there, that he was mobilizing the National Guard to find her. "Mr. Karl," the heavy man said. His voice changed. It became deferential, almost professional. "Yeah, we got her. Check your mailbox. There's a note inside. 30 grand. Small bills. Do exactly what it says." He listened for a moment, then nodded. He shoved the receiver against Marie's bruised ear. "Talk to your husband," he ordered. "Tell him you're alive." Marie gripped the phone. Her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped it. "Harry," she wept. "Harry, it's me. Oh God, Harry, please help me." The voice on the other end was the most terrifying sound she had ever heard. It wasn't the voice of a panicked husband. It was the voice of a man interrupted during a mild inconvenience. "Marie?" Harry Karl said. His tone was flat, devoid of affect. "Are you all right?" "I don't know," she sobbed. "They took me. They hurt me, Harry. They broke my teeth." There was a long silence. Marie expected frantic questions, instructions, or emotional reassurances. Instead, Harry simply agreed to the terms with the casual indifference of a man paying a parking ticket. According to later accounts, the conversation was brief, bizarrely calm, and devoid of negotiation. The heavy man snatched the phone back. "Yeah, we'll be in touch." He hung up, looking more puzzled than triumphant. He turned to his partner, ignoring Marie's plea. "He's paying," the man muttered, staring at the phone. Didn't even try to bargain. Just, okay, like he was waiting by the call. The realization hit her with more force than any blow. It wasn't just that he had abandoned her to the wolves. It seemed he was coordinating with them. The hopelessness of the situation broke her completely. Marie slumped onto the dirt floor, trapped in a feedback loop of horror while the night wore on and the temperature in the shack dropped. She shivered violently, the sedatives pulling her into a hallucination where the shadows on the wall looked like shoeboxes, stacking higher and higher until they crushed her. Then the dynamic in the room shifted. The wiry man stood up. He walked over to where she lay. He looked down at her. The care was over. The business call was done. Now there was just time to kill. "She's still got the legs," he muttered. The heavy man didn't stop him. He just lit a cigarette and turned his back. "Make it quick. We gotta move her in an hour." Marie tried to crawl away. She tried to kick, but her body was a lead weight. The assault that followed was not an act of passion. It was an act of erasure. It was the final stripping away of her personhood. The body was used, not as a woman, but as a receptacle for their boredom and their malice. She disassociated. She floated above the room, looking down at the broken blonde woman on the dirt floor. She thought about the magazine covers. She thought about the soldiers who had pinned her picture to their bunks. She thought about the lies Hollywood told about glamour. They never told you that being a sex symbol meant you were public property. They never told you that when the camera stops rolling, the men don't stop taking. When it was over, the wiry man stood up and zipped his pants. He looked at her with contempt, as if her brokenness was an insult to him. "Here," he said, throwing a blanket over her. "Cover up. You look like a wreck." Sometime before dawn, having finished their work, the heavy man shook her awake. "Let's go. Ride's over." They dragged her back to the car. Marie didn't fight. She was hollowed out. She was a ghost haunting her own body. They drove for what felt like hours. The desert landscape rolled by in the darkness, a moonscape of indifference. Marie sat in the back seat, her head resting against the cold glass of the window. She watched the stars. She wondered if she was already dead. Maybe this was hell, an eternal car ride with two men who smelled of violence, driving toward nowhere. The car slowed. They were on a lonely stretch of highway near Indio. There were no lights, no houses, just the endless black ribbon of asphalt. "Get out," the heavy man said. He opened the door and pulled her out. The wind was fierce, whipping her torn pajamas around her legs. "Start walking," he pointed toward the horizon. "Someone will find you, eventually." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a coin, a 50-cent piece. He pressed it into her hand. "Call your husband when you get to a phone," he said, a cruel smirk playing on his lips. "Tell him the package has been delivered." They got back in the car. The taillights flared red, disappearing into the silence of the desert night. Then they were gone. Marie McDonald stood alone in the desert. She looked at the coin in her hand. 50 cents. That was the value placed on her life. That was her severance package from the marriage. She began to walk, one foot in front of the other, her bare feet bleeding on the gravel. She wasn't just walking toward rescue, she was walking toward a different kind of execution. Her salvation, when it finally arrived, came in the form of headlights cutting through the darkness. A truck driver named Frank Rigney spotted a figure crawling in the ditch. As his flashlight beam hit her, it wasn't a beacon of hope, it felt like an interrogation lamp. Marie looked up, her face a ruin of bruises and dirt. "Help me," she whispered. Rigney wrapped his jacket around her, but Marie felt a cold certainty settling in her chest, colder than the desert night. The physical torture was over. The men with the guns were gone, but the real torture, the psychological dismantling of her sanity, was just beginning. She was about to be put on trial for her own suffering. As the ambulance sirens wailed in the distance, drawing closer, Marie closed her eyes. She visualized Harry's face. She didn't see love, she didn't see hate. She saw the blank, indifferent stare of a man looking at a pair of shoes that had been scuffed beyond repair. In her mind, there was no doubt. He may not have pulled the trigger, but she was certain he bought the bullets. And with the terrifying clarity of the damned, she realized that no one would believe her. Because in Hollywood, the script is written by the men who signed the checks, and Marie McDonald had just been written out of the show. When she woke, the hospital room was stark white. The smell of antiseptic replaced the smell of desert dust. Marie lay in the bed, her face a swollen mask of purple and blue. A nurse was dabbing at her split lip. A doctor was examining the stumps of her teeth. But the room wasn't quiet. It was filled with men in suits, detectives. They didn't look like they were investigating a crime. They looked like they were auditing a tax return. "Mrs. Karl," Detective Miller said. He was a man with a tired face and eyes that had seen too many actresses cry on cue. "Let's go over this again." "I told you," Marie mumbled, her mouth numb from the Novocaine. "2 men. They took me." "Right. The 2 men," Miller said, flipping open his notebook. "The men who kidnapped a millionaire's wife but didn't ask for a ransom. The men who beat you up but gave you your specific prescription medication. The men who let you go with 50 cents. He paused, letting the skepticism hang in the air like smoke. "You have to admit, Mrs. Karl, it sounds cinematic." Marie tried to sit up. "Look at my face. Look at my teeth. Do you think I did this to myself?" Miller shrugged. "We see a lot of things in this town, ma'am. Women do strange things when they're unhappy at home, when they want attention." "Attention?" Marie screamed. "I was violated. I was tortured." "There's no evidence of sexual assault that we can definitively prove right now," the doctor interjected quietly, looking at his clipboard. "And given your history of substance use." The trap snapped shut. It wasn't the kidnappers who had silenced her. It was her own reputation. Harry Karl had played the long game. He had spent years painting her as the unstable, drug-addled, hysterical wife. He had laid the groundwork so perfectly that when she finally screamed for help, the world heard only a performance. The door to the hospital room opened. Harry Karl walked in. He was wearing a pristine gray suit. He held a hat in his hands. He looked like the picture of a concerned husband, but Marie saw the glint in his eyes. He walked to the bedside. He didn't hug her. He didn't kiss her forehead. He stood over her, casting a long shadow across the bed sheets. "Harry," she whispered, tears leaking from her swollen eyes. Tell them it's real." Harry looked at the detectives. He looked at the doctor. Then he looked down at his wife. He sighed, the same tired, annoyed sigh she had heard on the phone. "Gentlemen," Harry said softly, "my wife has been through a terrible ordeal. Her imagination, it gets the best of her sometimes." He patted her hand. It wasn't a comfort. It was a warning. "We'll take her home," Harry said. "She just needs rest and her medicine." Marie froze. Her medicine, the chemical leash. He was taking her back to the glass cage. He was taking her back to the silence. "No," she whimpered. "I don't want to go back." Harry silenced her with a sharp look, his demeanor shifting instantly from husband to handler. He turned to the detectives, dismissing her terror as mere hysteria. "I'll handle this from here," he said with finality. "She just needs rest." And just like that, the investigation was effectively over before it began. The Shoe King had reclaimed his property. The defective merchandise was being returned to the warehouse for repairs. As they wheeled her out of the hospital, flashes of cameras erupted like lightning. The press had arrived. Marie shielded her broken face. She saw the headlines in her mind already. The body's biggest flop. The hoax of the century. She looked at Harry's back as he walked ahead of her stretcher. He was walking with a bounce in his step. He had won. He had destroyed her credibility, humiliated her publicly, and now he was taking her home to lock the door. The kidnapping was over. The imprisonment was just beginning. By noon, the police were back at the house, not to protect Marie, but to dismantle her story. They weren't there to search the crime scene. They were there to search for evidence of the hoax. Detective O'Mara led the search. He moved through Marie's bedroom with the invasive arrogance of a man who has already made up his mind. He opened drawers. He rifled through her underwear. He checked the bathroom cabinet. Then he found it, the smoking gun. On the nightstand, buried under a stack of magazines, was a paperback book, The Fuzzy Pink Nightgown by Sylvia Tate. O'Mara held it up like a trophy. The novel's plot was damningly specific. A fading movie star stages her own kidnapping to revive her career. To O'Mara, this wasn't coincidence, it was a script. He bagged the evidence with a triumphant smirk. "She read the book," he declared, "life imitating art." In that moment, the victim became the villain. Marie McDonald was no longer just a victim. In the eyes of the LAPD, she was now a plagiarist. This public humiliation culminated 2 weeks later when Marie was summoned to testify before the grand jury. It was unprecedented. Usually, victims of violent crimes are shielded, but the Los Angeles District Attorney, under pressure from the press and skepticism from the police, decided to put the victim on trial. Marie arrived at the courthouse in a wheelchair. She wore dark glasses and a scarf wrapped around her head to hide the bruising that had turned a sickly yellow-green. She was heavily sedated. Harry had ensured she took a double dose of tranquilizers for her nerves. She was wheeled into the chamber. It was a room full of men. The air was thick with cigar smoke and cynicism. The questioning was brutal. It wasn't an inquiry. It was a vivisection. "Mrs. Karl," the prosecutor began, pacing in front of her, "you claim you were taken by 2 men. Can you describe them? One was heavy, One was thin, Marie mumbled. She was fighting the fog in her brain. The room seemed to tilt. A heavy man and a thin man, the prosecutor repeated, looking at the jury with a smirk. He openly mocked her description, asking if she was describing criminals or a comedy act like Laurel and Hardy. Laughter rippled through the room. They hurt me, Marie said, tears sliding down her cheeks. They broke my teeth. Yes, the teeth, the prosecutor said. He leaned in close. We have a dentist's report, Mrs. Karl. It suggests the breaks are clean, almost surgical. Is it possible you had them removed, or perhaps you broke them yourself with a tool? Marie gasped. I didn't. And the phone call. The prosecutor continued, relentless. Your husband says you sounded rehearsed. He says you sounded like you were reading lines. He didn't wait for an answer. Instead, he slammed the paperback novel onto the table, The Fuzzy Pink Nightgown. The sound echoed like a gavel strike. Did you memorize your lines before or after you destroyed your own face, Mrs. Karl? Marie looked at the jury. She saw no sympathy, only the cold curiosity of men watching a broken toy try to speak. I didn't do it, she whispered. I swear on my children's lives. I didn't do it. Then who did? The prosecutor roared. Who kidnaps a woman, asks for no money, feeds her pills, and lets her go? Who benefits, Mrs. Karl? Marie looked at the faces of the jurors. Though Harry was not in the room, barred from the secret proceedings, his presence felt suffocating. She knew the power he wielded outside those walls. He had effectively silenced his troublesome wife and discredited her potential divorce testimony. If she pointed the finger at Harry now, without concrete proof, she risked being committed to an asylum before the sun went down. The invisible hand of the Shoe King seemed to grip her throat. I don't know, she whispered, defeated. I don't know. Unmoved by her tears, the grand jury deliberated. They didn't indict anyone for kidnapping. They found insufficient evidence that a crime had occurred. It was a legal exoneration for the kidnappers, whoever they were, and a condemnation for Marie. The system had looked at her broken body and decided it was a forgery. Harry wheeled her out of the courthouse. The flashbulbs popped like gunfire. It's over, Marie, he whispered in her ear as he pushed the chair toward the waiting limousine. We're going home. No more talking. With her credibility shattered by the verdict, Marie returned to the mansion, but the silence between the walls had grown deafening. The marriage was effectively over. Harry Karl filed for divorce in 1958, citing her instability. He would soon move on to marry America's sweetheart, Debbie Reynolds, leaving Marie to face the public scrutiny alone. The years that followed were a blur of attempted comebacks and deepening addiction. The trauma of the desert night, combined with the public ridicule, took a heavy toll. Marie McDonald, once the celebrated body of Hollywood, passed away on October 21, 1965, from an accidental overdose at the age of 42. While the law never definitively solved the kidnapping of 1957, it remains the defining tragedy of her life. Whether a hoax, as the police claimed, or a brutal message from a controlling husband, as Marie believed, the event revealed the dark underbelly of Hollywood's golden age. Was Marie McDonald the greatest actress of her time, performing a kidnapping to save a dying career? Or was she the victim of a plot so cruel that even the law refused to believe it? In the end, the desert kept its secrets, and Hollywood simply turned the page. But looking back at the evidence today, ask yourself, was Marie McDonald the greatest actress of her generation for staging this? Or was she simply a woman screaming for help in a room full of deaf men?